Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see such an incredibly huge turnout for Somalia, a much forgotten and benighted nation. My name's Sam Kiley, and I shall be mediating this evening. For those of you, I forgot to send in a blurb about who the hell I was, so my background is I used to cover Africa for the Times and spent about 10 years covering Somalia in the 90s. Joining us this evening are Michela, who is a columnist for the new Statesman, author of I Didn't Do It For You, and In the Footsteps of Mr. Kurtz, which is a wonderful book. Azab Waldi-Georgis, here on my right, who is a very distinguished correspondent with CBC, who's been covering Africa almost as long as me. And Abdul Rahman here, who has kindly stepped in because Raghi Omar is ill as a consequence, I suspect, of a recent visit to Somalia. Abdul Rahman Osman is an expert on Somalia. It's his home country, and he is a former chairman of the Somalia Concern Group and is now based here in Britain. We have come to a stage historically in Somalia where no matter how much people try to forget that it exists, it has leapt back onto the front pages of the newspapers and onto invasion and the involvement of American special forces and special forces aircraft in bombing the south and the centre of the country. There is a considerable concern that the involvement of Ethiopia and Eritrea in the Horn of Africa, in the absolute Horn of Africa, i.e. Somalia, could trigger something really rather catastrophic across the region, which I assume is why people have come to listen to what the experts have to say about it. And I dare say there are some people in the audience who are considerably more expert than the experts that we've been kind enough to come and talk to us this evening. I haven't been in Somalia since 1999, so I, for one, look forward to learning from the panel and indeed from the audience. And I thought I'd begin the kick-off with Abdul Rahman, who could give us an overview from his perspective of where we stand now and how we got there.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to say that I cannot claim, and I'm not claiming that I can put into Raghi Omar's shoes, but I'll try my best to give you an overview of the current situation. And since January 1991, that was the collapse of the previous government, Siad Barre. Since then, the Somalia never had any stable, functioning government. We had civil war. Since then, we had 14 peace conferences held outside Somalia. And the latest one was the one that was held in Kenya, 2003-2004. And the outcome was in October 2004. We had transition of federal institutions, which were comprised of 275 members of parliament. They then elected a speaker of the parliament, then a president. Then the president appointed a prime minister and council of ministers. Since then, the transition of federal institutions, and after that they split. And the reason for the split was because of the president at the time of the appointment in October, he went to Addis Ababa and immediately said that he wants 20,000 troops to help his government to function. That created an animosity or problems with some of the warlords who were part of the transition federal government, and there were ministers as well. So that split started there, and then the government were having problems to relocate to Somalia for some time. Then at the end they decided to go to Johar, which is 90 kilometers in outskirts of Mogadishu. Since then, and as you all know, warlords never participated or never wanted to contribute to the government. That they were part of the Council of Ministers, they were part of the members of the parliament, and Mogadishu mainly, where the main warlords were based, they went to their bases, and They started some initiatives, but that never bear any fruits. Since then, what we've seen was in last year, and there's a lot of involvement in terms of international community, let's say US in particular. We're trying to help the warlords and to give some kind of resources in order to, what they claim is to capture for 3 individuals who they claim were responsible for the US embassy's bombings in East Africa. And since that time, warlords in 17th of February, they started alliance group. They formed that alliance they call Anti-Terrorist Alliance. That triggered to the point to the Islamic Courts Union, who were in existence for some time, but it wasn't on the main frame, if you like, because there were some clans had their own courts where they're protecting for their own people, and in terms of their criminal activities, but these courts were never providing any public services. Since then, at the end of 2005, in 2005, Islamic Courts had a conference where they appointed Islamic Courts Union to oversee partly of Mogadishu, or the different parts of the courts exist in Mogadishu. That's when they formed an alliance. Those alliances then, with the public support, and they overthrown warlords because people perceive warlords, the US helping the warlords, and therefore they're against anti-Islam. So their card was to use like Islam and to unite people. Therefore that worked for them. And also we have seen an uprising in Mogadishu since February up to June. There was fighting between warlords and Islamic Courts Union. At the beginning of June, Islamic Courts Union captured or overthrew all the warlords in Mogadishu. They all fled from the city. Some of them went to refuge to the government. The government were based in Baidawa, which is a city in southwest in the capital. At the time, the government were against the warlords, but yet they were not happy with Islamic Courts Union. Therefore, they never tried to attempt to work with Islamic Courts Union to get rid of warlords. Since June, what we have seen is Islamic Courts Union control Mogadishu, peace, stability. They provided public services. They repaired some of the roads, reconstructionists, and they opened the main port and the main international airport as well. The peace and security and justice, people felt, well, this is the leadership that we wanted. And then they advanced to south regions, and most of the south regions they were controlling. Then the problem was there's peace process in the Khartoum, where Islamic Courts Union and the government trying to negotiate, to come to terms, to have power sharing agreement. But yet that never bore any fruits. There was claims that the government never had an attempt or never had a vision to work with Islamic Courts Union. At the same time, Islamic Courts Union never had a vision to work with the TFG. They thought TFG are corrupt. They're not bringing stability or what the people want. So because they had public support them, they thought they could do without them. So, but however, the government were not free from external forces. Ethiopia was the main who were supporting with the transition federal government. They publicly declared that if the International Courts Union tried to overthrow to the TFG, that they will step in and they will support with the TFG. And then what we have seen since then, 12th of December, Islamic Courts Union then decree of, they gave 7 days for Ethiopian troops inside Somalia to go back to Ethiopia. And that was an ultimatum given by the Islamic Courts Union. Ethiopia triggered that point and they said, hang on, we got threat, these people are coming to us, we will have to act. We've got no option other than to step in. And then, 19th of December, the fighting broke out between the TFG and Ethiopian troops, helped with the TFG and Islamic Courts Union. That fighting was up until 24th. That was when the Ethiopian publicly declared they're going into Somalia. And also we've seen air strikes in Beledweyne, Mogadishu, and also and some other parts in Somalia. Since that time, then what we've seen is the fall of the Islamic Courts Union, and they mainly fled to the south in Kismayo, and then from there on. So when they were in Mogadishu, people thought that this is a golden opportunity for them. They're going to try to defend Mogadishu and start guerrilla war, because they were saying they will change their tactics. Then people thought when it comes to Mogadishu, it's going to be difficult for Ethiopian troops to come in if the guerrilla war started. However, Islamic Courts Union, with the elders of Mogadishu, with the intellectuals, with the civil societies, they agreed to abandon to go to Kismayo. So that has helped in a way of the humanitarian catastrophe in Mogadishu, because there's no fighting inside Mogadishu. However, when the government and the Ethiopian troops came into Mogadishu, people thought, some people said, as long as we can get peace, stability, security, we don't mind. However, what we have seen is an increase of violence, increase of humanitarian disaster, increase of violations of human rights, and the transitional federal government, since they captured most of the south, what they done was, instead of trying to initiate reconciliation with its people, what they done was they thought that we are the powerful here, then started authoritarian, and then they started to overthrow the Speaker of the Parliament, who was at the time outside in Somalia, and he was trying to negotiate between Islamic Courts Union and, so they said he's part of the Islamic Courts Union, we don't need him, so they overthrown from Speaker of the Parliament, and now they were trying to replace him. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is what we've seen is closure of the media in Mogadishu, the TFG closed, and also what we have seen is the Kenya sent some, they claim it's militia from Islamic Courts Union to Mogadishu, but the treatment that these people received, they were blindfolded and they handcuffed, and no one knows now where they are. There was 2 trips made, and one was 34 admitted by the TFG, and the other one there was still no one knows how many people there. On top of that, we have seen the US strikes on the 8th of January and 23rd of January in the border of Kenya and Somalia. The first strike on the 8th, the Americans claimed that they had credible intelligence that 3 people that they were looking are there. And the 3 people they looking, as I said before, is Abu Taha al-Sudan, Faisal Abdullah Muhammad, and Saleh Ali Saleh. Americans' claim was that it's been always since 98, they are in Somalia. Because Somalia is a failed state, these people can stay there. And what the Americans told Islamic Courts Union, if they come power with the agenda of Islamism, then they could harbor these people. Not only these 3 people, but they could attract other foreign Al-Qaeda. That was the claim. So that on the 8th, the first they said, the guy Faisal that they were looking is died in the airstrike. But since then we have learned that he wasn't part of the people who were killed. Civilians and also people were fled from there, seeking refuge to Kenya. Kenya stopped the border because they were working with the Americans and Ethiopia, refusing for even civilians to flee from Somalia to there. So in terms of a humanitarian crisis, it was huge, and no one can underestimate what's been happening. But the UNHCR, so the UN institutions, they were saying to the Kenyans, you cannot do this, because these people are civilians, therefore you will have to accept them as refugees. In terms of the international community, you could say that the inactions or the actions of the international communities created the current situation that we've seen, i.e. the rise of the Islamic Courts Union, i.e. the TFG not functioning properly. As you know, the UN Security Council agreed a resolution called 733 in 1992. That was imposed a comprehensive arms embargo on Somalia. However, since then, there was a breach of that arms embargo. The main perpetrators were Ethiopia, and the UN Monitoring Group also reported several times to the UN Security Council that Ethiopia and other countries were breached on that. No action was taken. and also Ethiopia violated in terms of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Somalia. Late November, what we have seen is the UN met and reaffirmed the UN monitoring group to continue. And then within a few days, early December, the UN met again, UN Security Council resolution, and adopted 1725, which asked AU peacekeeping forces to go in Somalia. Even that resolution clearly stated non-frontline states can participate of the peacekeeping. Then again, in 26th of December, this is when the fighting was still continuing, the Qatar put a proposal to the UN Security Council and asking that to ask all foreign troops to get out of Somalia. However, UK and US rejected that proposal, so it never bore any fruit. Again, when the US and UK rejected that proposal, the 27th of December, Kofi Annan, who was the then Secretary General, said, well, to stay out of crisis in Somalia, he meant for these Ethiopia and other countries such as Eritrea, to stay out of the crisis in Somalia and respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Somalia. Since then, as I said, we've seen these strikes, so the situation is very, very volatile still. The TFG, with the help of the Ethiopians, is now controlling all the regions. However, AU summit yesterday agreed that adopted that AU troops to be sent. However, there's an issue of whether AU forces can maintain peace stability in Somalia, whether they can help the TFG to run effectively, and there's a big question mark. As we have seen, AU never brought any fruits in the places that they have been, such as Sudan, Darfur, as we all know. Yeah, and they already, some countries accepted, said that they're going to send troops, but yet we still no timetable on that. Ethiopians, on the other hand, saying that they're going to withdraw from Somalia by phase, and whether they will withdraw completely once the AU troops come back. The question again, how can we trust Ethiopia? And people still believe that Ethiopia will remain despite whether the AU or come back, because of the current TFG leaders are happy with the Ethiopians and they are there for the Ethiopia basically. So the situation is very, very, in terms of external forces, in terms of the current transitional federal government leadership, and it's very, very difficult to oversee, to overcome the current situation. What it needs probably, if I may conclude, is proper reconciliation. But however, it's going to be difficult, and if that can happen inside Somalia, where Ethiopia and the TFG are the main force, the only force inside Somalia, and then whether the peace reconciliation can bear any fruit, where the people will have proper rights to inclusiveness, proper rights to their views, and it's going to be very difficult. And international community, and or even UK or US, no one is willing to take initiative or leadership to see whether this can bear any fruits. So the situation is very volatile.
Abdul Rahman, thank you very much for a very comprehensive history there, and it's no accident that it is comprehensive and that we needed it, because Somalia is a wildly complex place in and of its own right, quite aside from when you start considering which regional and then non-regional powers are involved. It seems to me that Somalia has three wars going on. It's got a sort of perpetual civil war. It's got itself involved in a regional war, and then it's part of this ghastly clash of civilizations. Michela, I wondered if you could add your pennyworth to how you think that this regional war might have come about.
I was here to talk about one aspect which I know about, but I'm not a Somalia expert by any means. I've spent a lot of time writing about Eritrea, and going back 5 years ago, there was a war between Eritrea and Ethiopia over their mutual border. And the border issue was supposed to be settled by a boundary commission meeting in The Hague, an international boundary commission, which issued its ruling. I'll be telling some of you stuff you already know, but I think there'll be other people who don't know. But that ruling, which was issued back in 2002, was actually not pleasing to either side, in that both sides had to give up on areas that they thought belonged to them. Eritrea and Ethiopia both felt that they had lost areas. But importantly, the symbolic village of Badme, which was where the most violent fighting had taken place, was given to Eritrea. Both countries had said they were going to abide by the agreement. It was going to be final and binding. But what we've seen in the last 5 years is that Ethiopia really can't bring itself to demarcate that border. So that border remains undemarcated, and that border has become an absolutely obsessive issue in Eritrea. And it has become the raison d'etre for the regime, an increasingly unaccountable regime in Eritrea, to keep all its young people in camouflage fighting, because they can legitimately say, our border is still an issue, we are defending ourselves, we could be attacked at any moment by Ethiopia, so you all have to do endless open-ended military service. So there's this huge well of poisonous feelings there. And I used to I wrote quite extensively about this and often wondered what would become of this, because international law was being violated in the middle of Africa, and what happens when that happens. And it seemed to me that the international community's response was very limp-wristed, because it's very important, always has been, to the West to be on good terms with the big regional player, which is Ethiopia, and nobody cares too much about Eritrea, which is only 4.5 million people. And I think Somalia is the answer to what happens if you just leave these things to fester, in that one of the reasons why the Islamic courts became a key player and much better at fighting than they had been before was thanks to military advice and military deliveries, weapons deliveries, and training that came from Eritrea. I think there were estimates of 2,000 Eritreans who were fighting inside Somalia for the Islamic courts. From what I gather, those are vastly, vastly overrated. I mean, we're probably talking only about a score of trainers. So I think there's been a lot of misinformation. But there has been a second proxy war. I think, above all of these things, we're talking about a proxy war being staged in the Horn of Africa by America and Islam, radical Islam. This is, it's moved across the world, Baghdad, Afghanistan, and now we have it taking place in the Horn of Africa. But there's also a regional proxy war. And that border issue is still unresolved. And I think if you want to deal with Somalia and you don't deal with that border issue, you're really never going to lance that boil. And that rivalry between two men who obviously hate each other now but were once close allies, Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea and Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia. Just today, the UN Security Council had to decide whether or not to extend the mandate of the UN force that separates the two sides. And that mandate has become more and more tested, because the Eritreans feel that the UN force serves no purpose. Why is it there? And they've made it very difficult for the UN to operate there. And they have also been moving troops into that tampon area between the two countries. On the Ethiopian side, there's been a lot of arming of artillery going up into that area. So both sides are making very worrying moves, and there have been more and more skirmishes between the two sides. So I think we should be aware that Somalia is not possibly going to be the only war in the Horn of Africa. We could be seeing something between Eritrea and Ethiopia quite soon if things go on. The UN Security Council, for its sins, I don't think it was a good move, has just decided to extend the mandate for 6 months, but downgrade the force from 2,300 people to 1,700, which is really just an observer force, and it means that there are more Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers along that border now than there will be UN observers. So I think, we can talk about Somalia. I'm sure we're going to talk in much more depth about it. But one of the contributory factors to what happened in Somalia has been this difficult, poisonous relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia the border would not solve it. I'm not saying demarcating would solve it, but I think it would be a positive move. And the only people who can put pressure, and the only country that can really be pressurized, because it's the country that's violating international law on this issue, the country is Ethiopia, and the people who can put pressure on Ethiopia are the Americans, in my view. And I think they have plenty of reasons to not want to do that, but since they seem to be very concerned about volatility in the Horn of Africa, they should really be turning their attention to the border along with Somalia.
Thanks, Michela. I'm going to go straight over to Azeb, who is ethnically Ethiopian but is speaking with a journalistic hat firmly on her head, and has recently been in Ethiopia. My question is, in addition to the Eritrean-Ethiopian squabble, Ethiopia has other reasons for getting involved in Somalia, no?
Yes. Well, I think just to put the perspective in the recent events in Somalia, tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia are not new. They've existed for about 40 years. Right after Somalia's independence in 1960, actually at the first summit of the OAU in 1963, the Somalian government was saying that Ethiopia was an empire, a colonial empire, and to which the Prime Minister of Ethiopia replied that Somalia has never been a nation, they were just clans. So I'm just giving you this example just to sort of illustrate the tension, the rivalry between Ethiopia and Somalia. So now today the new element, and there have been border disputes between Somalia and Ethiopia in the early 60s, also in 1977 because of the region of Ogaden. Somalia has always claimed that the region of Ogaden was colonized by Ethiopia and that it was there. Somali population in the Ogaden region, and that they wanted to unify the Somali population there. And also they were talking about the creation of the Greater Somalia, which would actually include parts of Ethiopia, parts of Kenya, and parts of Djibouti. So now the new element, I think, in this today is the war on terror. Now, what the Ethiopian government is arguing is that there's a real threat to its territorial integrity, also to its security. They're saying the ICU, the Union of Islamic Courts, is supporting liberation movements in Ethiopia, such as the Ogaden National Liberation Front, such as the Oromo Liberation Front, just to name those two, and that these movements have been fighting for decades to secede from Ethiopia. Therefore, the government is arguing that these people are a threat to our sovereignty and our territorial integrity. Also, the UIC has declared a jihad against Ethiopia on a number of occasions. And one of the ICU leaders, Union of Islamic Courts leaders, is well known to the Ethiopian authorities. I'm talking about Sheikh Hassan Dair Aviz. He has been accused of actually perpetrating attacks in Ethiopia in the mid-90s. He also has been talking recently, just before the Union of Islamic Courts have been disbanded, he has been talking recently about recreating the Greater Somalia, and again talking about possibly incorporate parts of Kenya, parts of Ethiopia, and parts of Djibouti. In the mid-90s, there were attacks in Harar, in Addis Ababa, and Jijiga, and Sheikh Hassan has been accused of perpetrating those attacks. Now, technically speaking and politically speaking, Ethiopia is saying we came to Somalia on the request of the transitional, federal government, and also which has the backing of the African Union, which has the backing of the UN, and more importantly, which has the backing of the intergovernmental, the IGAD, Intergovernmental Authority Development. So therefore, they're saying, we are there to defend the transitional federal government. Now, having said all that, there's no unanimity in this decision. There's a very strong opposition in Ethiopia. Opposition's leaders have said, why is Ethiopia why is Ethiopia, the military strike of Ethiopia is disproportionate? The problem have always existed between Ethiopia and Somalia. Why Ethiopia is now striking an attack against Somalia? Also, opposition in the diaspora of Ethiopia are saying, actually, is this another way of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia of diverting attention from its own domestic problems in the aftermath of the elections in 2005, where during demonstration 193 people were killed in Ethiopia. So is this a way for Meles just to divert the attention of his own unpopularity? And as we speak, opposition leaders are in prison in Addis Ababa, and that's the situation there. Also, many are saying that for Meles, it's a win-win situation. Not only he's just diverting the attention from what's going on in his own country, but also he's winning again an approval of the Americans. As we know, there was a resolution at the UN Security Council against the involvement of Ethiopian troops or foreign troops in Somalia, and the United States, I can't say put their veto, but they said maybe this is too soon. We should wait and see what will happen. So I think Ethiopia now has started to leave. The Ethiopian troops are leaving Somalia right now, and they're saying, the Ethiopian government is saying within 2-3 weeks they will be gone. Now that remains to be seen, as Rahim was saying. But the problem now is when they leave, they will leave a security vacuum. And now the African Union is having a difficult time to actually find nations who will pledge more troops to Ethiopia. As we speak, last night, the summit ended last night at midnight, and they managed to get 4,000 peacekeeping troops in Somalia. That number need to be doubled if we don't want to see chaos in Somalia. And also, I think the question remains, by acting the way it did, has Ethiopia triggered a new front line on the war on terror? And I think we'll see in the coming months if that's the case. And also, of course, we're questioning this preemptive action. Ethiopia is saying we need to strike because the threat is imminent. We have a security threat within our country, and also our borders are at threat. So that's what's at stake.
I forgot to mention at the beginning, we do hope to be joined by Robert Barre, who is an ex-CIA agent, author of See No Evil, who was the CIA man in northern Iraq and has since blown the whistle on the mess there. We're trying to get a telephone link to him. I think he's probably skiing in Davos or something grand. But as you point out, the great sort of semi-unmentioned in all of this is that Somalia is alleged to be a haven or a refueling base, if you like, for Islamic terrorists, Al-Qaeda. The intelligence services tell us that a good many of the people who perpetrated the atrocities in Tanzania and Kenya in 1998 have been able to be based there, have been able to regroup there, that there have been training camps there. Abdul Rahman, is this a charge that is legitimate?
Well, that's the claim that we have been hearing for the last almost 10 years, but still no one can prove whether these 3 individuals are inside Somalia. No one has
I'm not just talking about the 3 individuals. I mean, they may be in pieces. What the issue is that at Roscomboni and elsewhere in the south of Somalia, that it, notwithstanding the facts, is a fractious place and you need your head read to want to go and be based there, but that it has been possible for very bad people to operate in pockets of this lawless country.
Well, if we're talking about some extremists who would like to see Somalia instead of, like you see, Sharia law implemented and what have you, yes, there are individuals even within the Islamic Courts Union, in particular when we talk about the Shabab, which is the military wing. They had that vision of unifying Somalia and then implementing Sharia law and what have you, but they were never ever threat to externalists or outside. In terms of when we look now for the claims of the Ethiopians saying that they're legitimately there, the government asking them to go. But the government, we have transitional federal institutions, the Parliament of Somalia, never ever agreed that frontline states to come in. Ethiopia, before they even accepted, their troops were there.
My question is Al-Qaeda in Somalia?
And well, it's difficult for me to say yes or no, but we haven't seen. You're
not
proof.
picking, are you?
We haven't seen the proof.
So do you? What is your view?
My personal view is there's no Al-Qaeda in Somalia. All Somalis are not linked with Al-Qaeda in terms of culturally, traditionally, never been associated with Al-Qaeda. But if you're talking about people who are Islam, who are Muslim, who sympathize for the actions that they do for Al-Qaeda, yes, maybe we have a lot of people. But there's no individualist who could say, let's say, for example, the Hassan Dahir Awais, who is in the UN list. Who put the list is the Ethiopian intelligence. And then US is accepting the Ethiopia intelligence to be used for Somalia. And then how can you trust Ethiopia, who's been part of the problem in Somalia?
Well, I'm not sure we got. I do hope that they don't only rely on the Ethiopian intelligence services, but I've been very wrong in the past. But let's explore this a bit more. I mean, this is why not only has Somalia been invaded by Ethiopian troops, but it's been invaded by American special forces and their aircraft. Now, these are expensive bits of kit to fly around. It can be quite embarrassing if you get it wrong. Do you, Michela, think that there is any possibility that Islamic terrorists may be basing themselves out of Somalia?
I think that we're seeing a fundamental paradigm shift in the way the world deals with Africa. And I think it's a very depressing one. And this is the first war in Africa of the war on terror. And I think I see it as a sort of a basic shift in that for the last year and a half following Gleneagles, where we all thought the Cold War was over, and now you talk about democracy and you pump money into Africa and you have elections and you talk about corruption and you tackle corruption and this is the great way ahead. I mean, I guess I've been writing for quite a long time that I thought the war on terror brought that era to a close, and I think this war illustrates that because its spillover impact goes far, far beyond Somalia. It goes into the way we deal with every country in Africa. If you just look at the way the Americans and British now deal with Kenya, which is a country that I'm particularly interested in, you have an incredibly corrupt new government that replaced an incredibly corrupt old government. The incredibly new government of Mwai Kibaki, which might expect to be rapped over the knuckles, treated harshly, criticised, is now very important to the Americans. And of course we tend to follow in what the Americans do, because the American army has been operating along the border between Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya. And apparently there has been a sort of area in which journalists coming up from Nairobi are not allowed because the Americans won't let them, and they want to go in and find out what's going on along on that border area. The Kenyans are cooperating. What are the Kenyans going to get back in return for being so cooperative, so helpful in the war on terror? Well, we can imagine that Mwai Kibaki's corrupt government isn't going to be subjected to quite so close scrutiny, that the kind of aid conditionalities that have been applied to Kenya and all the other friendly countries are going to be slightly different in future. And I think the whole paradigm with which the West has been telling us through Make Poverty History and Geldof and Bono that we in future will deal with Africa has completely been jinxed, sabotaged and destroyed by the war on terror. And this is the first example. I think it's very, very depressing for the rest of Africa and the way that we are going to deal with Africa and all the stuff that we're going to hear about encouraging good governance and anti-corruption in Africa has just been proved by what has happened in Somalia to be just so much guff. So that's my fairly sweeping assessment on that one.
Yeah, well, that's that. Yeah, up yours, George Bush. Michela's argument notwithstanding, if Somalia is a haven with or without the connivance of Somalis for people who want everybody in this room dead, isn't it a perfectly legitimate target in the war on terror?
That's a good question. I think.
Well, obviously.
Well, I think from the Ethiopian point of view, and I was there in Addis in October, and I think just the idea of even imagining religious tension in Ethiopia is just too hard to even imagine it. We're talking about half the population is Muslim and the other half is Christian. So if this becomes a sort of religious war, I think it's something that should be avoided at all costs. And I think all of us agree with that. If the Horn of Africa is caught into that, it's definitely going to be very difficult. When I was there were reports of some mosques being attacked in Jimma, which is southwest of Ethiopia, also churches being attacked. Now, whether or not there was a link with what's happening in Somalia remains to be proven. But there were a lot of incidents happening in Ethiopia. Also, having talked to some Ethiopian journalists, they were saying there's a video circulating in Addis, a videotape of atrocities of sort of violence between Muslim and Christians in Ethiopia. And this is something very new, because in Ethiopia, Muslim and Christians have always been living together very peacefully. And just to imagine that could happen is something that is too hard to even imagine, I think.
I think war on terror, it might be legitimate if it's been used accurately and appropriately. But now what we've seen is leaders of Africa utilizing the war on terror to their political advantage, to their own use, and then that's what Americans need to learn lessons from, how the war on terror, now it comes to a term like is not bearing the fruit that's been created for at the beginning. So a problem of implementation.
I think just to add something, I think so far we've learned with Iraq and Afghanistan that preemptive strikes does not work, and military intervention, you don't win peace. You may win a victory, but you don't really win peace. So I think war on terror, any war on a noun anyway, is never war on poverty, war on terror. It's never really worked. So whatever war on terror means, really.
I'm going to throw it all open, the debate open to the floor, where I'm sure we've got a great deal to learn from. And if you wouldn't mind identifying yourselves, this is not least because these proceedings are being filmed and handed over to various security services. Julian?
It would be wrong of me not to continue our long tradition, Michela, of being in disagreement with each other. So,
who are you?
My name's Julian Ozan. I think that if I travel a lot in Africa now, and I see a lot of hope, and I don't see a terrible domino effect from this. I think there are very few countries in Africa that are affected by the war on terror, and I think that one of the things that we've missed here is about Africa's own responsibility. There's been a long, long time since there were foreign troops in Somalia. There's been an African-led process which has been regional, which has been non-governmental, which has brought in civil society, which has made vast attempts at reconciliation. It's been an African-led process. And the fact of it is that 16 years since Siad Barre, I'm trying to put the date on when the last foreign troop would have left Somalia. 95. 12 years since the last foreign troop was in Somalia. Somalia hasn't actually managed to find its own way through reconciliation. And I think there's a lot of people who see Africa's problems now as being a responsibility of Africans to resolve. I don't think that white people and Western people and the Americans have a lot of answers to that. I think there has to be an African-led process, particularly for reconciliation, and as much as possible that should happen without stereotypical external influences in how that process ought to go. And I think there's been a lot of efforts to do that in Kenya, in Ethiopia, with regional people involved and so on. And I think a lot of people have also put a lot of hope in the African Union and the Africans' ability to police their own political issues. The fact of it is that eventually there comes a point in time where outsiders are going to protect their own interests. And I think that, if a nation can't find its way out from the chaos, I remember in 1991 sitting in the office of the American ambassador in Ethiopia. It's called Bob Hudek, who was definitely a CIA station chief. And Bob said to me after in 1991, we think the Horn of Africa is a depreciated piece of real estate. And I think there's very much a view from the outside world that it is a depreciated piece of real estate, that there aren't any real long-term strategic interests, and that actually, there's very, very little interest in the economic future of the Horn of Africa. And I think that basically there's a containment strategy. I think there's not an engagement strategy. And in a way, I think that presents an opportunity for Africans to seize hold of their own destiny and try and resolve their own issues. And I think that we're a long, long way now from colonialism, and we're getting a long way away from the Cold War proxy and the effects of that. And I think it's time for people in Africa to seize their own destiny and decide where they want to go. And I don't think that we're suffering from a domino effect. And I don't feel pessimistic about what's happening in many other parts of Africa, which are taking the opportunity to get ahead and forge their own destiny.
Can I?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say if you believe in Africans finding their own solutions, it seems to me that was exactly what the Islamic courts were trying to do. And as a woman, I'm certainly not in favor of radical Islam, and I don't like what it does to your daily life. But there was something going on there which was very interesting and was bringing security to the streets, and people could drive around. The ports were opening up, the airport was opening up, and it seemed to have a lot of popular support. So, and I would say that it seems to me that the Ethiopian intervention was neo-colonialist. It was supported by America. There's been massive arms, millions and millions of arms going in from America to Ethiopia. There's a Camp Lemonia in Djibouti, where Djibouti has been used as a colonial outpost, neo-colonial outpost. And it's a classic. I don't like to use this language. It seems to me outdated. But, Ethiopia went into Mogadishu because it had the Americans' blessing. So that doesn't strike me as an African solution to an African problem. That strikes me as a neo-colonial problem imposed on something that was quite interesting. Maybe it was tending towards being an extremist, radical Islamic regime. We will now never know. It seems to me that there were more intelligent ways of engaging with the Islamic courts that might have prevented the radicals coming to the fore. And I don't get the impression that was really tried, because if you box out a movement from the international community, you turn them into pariahs, you do encourage the radicals in that community. And I think that's what we did in the West. So I would just sort of say that I think, there was an African solution there, and it was crushed. And that I do see it still as a proxy situation.
Abdul Rahman?
Yeah, I think there's an issue, there's a need for leadership for Africans to take ownership of. Yes, I agree with you, but in terms of when you look at the Somali issues, people say it's an ideal to leave it for the local region to sort the problem. But you got a local region, IGAD, there's a problem of Ethiopia, Kenya, and so forth. So they are part of the problem. So how can you allow them to intermediate for the Somalis to solve the problem? Furthermore, in 2000, in Djibouti, Somalis had an initiative where they came for transitional national government at the time, TNG, led by Abdul Rahman Hassan. At the time, that was Somali-led. It was fine, but the problem that it did not work because of the external forces. Ethiopia labeled them as there's extremists in that government. Therefore, the international community or the US never tried to help that government. And now, as my colleague said, Islam Courts Union, initiative for the locally, and it could have worked out to be negotiated with TFG. But the external forces allowed or didn't allow that to happen.
I think just to add on this, I think from the African Union point of view, actually the transitional federal government of Somalia was actually the African solution for African problems. They were actually gathering many people from the Somali government, various leaders of various clans, and after 2 years of negotiation, they created the transitional federal government of Somalia. And that was, from the African Union point of view, the solution for Somalia. Now, that legal, if you want, government was ousted, always stayed in Baidoa, never had much power. But from the African Union point of view and from the countries in the region, that transitional federal government was actually the solution, not the Union of Islamic Courts.
So you got the great advantage of 2 African solutions all in one place. Gentleman there, just would you mind waiting for the thing? Please identify yourself.
Hello there, my name is Ahmed. Hello there. I came to this country as a consequence of the civil war. I understand the dynamics of Somalia in relation to culturally and also the tribalism. Your question in relation to Al-Qaeda, I believe Al-Qaeda will not stand a chance in Somalia due to the complexity of the society itself and the poverty that it faces. I think if you look at the courts, they've actually established peace, which hasn't been seen in Somalia for about 15 years. And I think that hasn't been utilized, number one. And secondly, I think the argument is far beyond states. It's an ideology war. Whether it's a call to Islam, America doesn't want that. And I think America will have to face up to that one day. But at the moment, these societies are in the middle and they're suffering. But there has to be an answer in the long term. And America needs to realize that.
So why didn't the Islamic courts, when they had the opportunity, hand over these Al-Qaeda suspects?
Well, number one, Al-Qaeda suspects in Somalia. I mean, what have they done? I mean, there was no
proof. They blew up 2 embassies.
Well, that's what the claim is. But were they actually in Somalia? Was there evidence that they were in Somalia? The thing is, today international relations is based on who says what and what is he gaining from. And the whole idea of international relations in relation to evidence-based international law has gone. What is now is what's in the interest of this hegemony, which is America. And at the moment, they don't want anything to do with Islam. And obviously, they would like to keep the status quo going. But one day, they'll have to face up to this. And what is required is global leadership that will obviously give a safety net to these kind of issues.
Thank you. I saw some, and those are hands gone up over there. Gentleman in the blue shirt.
So my name's Tom Cooks. I work for Dayline SBS Television. I spent a bit of time in Somalia at the end of 2005 and beginning 2006, and actually interviewed Sharif Hassan in Mogadishu and Abdullah Yusuf as well. I think there's as much Al-Qaeda in Somalia as there is in Bradford. And I think the difference is you don't see AC-130s shooting up Bradford. And I think one of the depressing things for me is I think the reason there are so many of us here tonight is that the Americans have shot up southern Somalia. And that suddenly it's put on the agenda. And I think it's a really juvenile way to look at a very complicated problem and seeing everything through this lens of terrorism. And Somalia, has far more knobs on it than that. And I think I find it a very irritating burrow to chase down to look at everything through that point of view. There's a lot to do people are talking about an African solution, about the IGAD involvement, the frontline states, and I think that's what you have to think about. And I think if you obsess about looking for Al-Qaeda suspects in Somalia, then you're going to be hung up on the American policy of containment, and you're not going to do anything about actually advancing anything within Somalia.
So what should they have done? The Yanks.
Gone home.
Well, they did that. They just came back. There's a lady here. Sorry, I'm trying to just do left and right.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Heyman. I'm Carolyn Heyman from Peace Direct. I was very pleased to hear our first speaker, I'm sorry I've forgotten your name, talking about the role of civil society in Somalia, because that's really the lens that I've been following the story through. And I suppose my question is, we can blame lots of people, but why aren't we blaming the transitional federal government? To have a government that can't even operate from a single place, to have a government that's photographed throwing chairs at each other. Where was the leadership? If the government had behaved in a more responsible way and exercised the leadership that it owed to the people who elected them, there wouldn't have been an opportunity for the Americans to intervene. If they'd been prepared to talk about power sharing with the ICU, we could have had a situation that didn't leave room for outsiders to intervene. So my question is, what would it take to have responsible leadership from the Somali government? What would have to change?
I think what we're seeing at the moment is, yes, you're right. The problem is the TFG. The TFG, since they came, I think the problem what they're lacking is the leadership. what they like in his vision, to see that Somalia is for Somalis, to see that they are the government for its people. They need to see that negotiation within their people can only solve the problem through dialogue, through peaceful means. But the only problem is, if they know that external forces are helping them, then why do you go to democracy? Why do you consult with everybody? Why do you do inclusiveness? Why? The problem we got here is the Western countries promoting democracy, rule of law, peace, stability, but yet they're not encouraging for those civil societies inside Somalia who are doing a fantastic job to rise up and to get leadership from there. So the problem we got in Somalia is poor leadership.
You mentioned the Western countries. Do you think that the non-Western countries, I don't mean the regional countries, but the Islamic world has been involved in Somalia at all?
Yes, Islamic has been involved. For example, let's say the civil war started in 1991. Since up to now, inside Somalia, even though there's Qaeda, no functional government, but yet public services to a certain degree has been going on well. And that was led by the Islamic charities helping for the education side. And there's more schools, there's more, even though there's no government, all that. They help for that sense in terms of, but in terms of politically, Arab countries, Islamic countries cannot help because America is watching them. So that is the problem in reality.
That gentleman in the blue shirt there has been waving.
My name is Haptom. I'm from the region. I don't
from
share
the region? Aren't we all, darling? Where are you from?
Eritrea. I don't share the hopes of this gentleman in front who said about African Union trying to solve the problem in Somalia. I mean, we can see that how inept they are in Darfur. Even they couldn't hold the whole ceasefire or the humanitarian catastrophe. I don't believe they can do anything in Somalia. I think what the solution could only comes from within the Somalia. I mean, the Islamic court weren't military strong, but they managed to keep peace and security because they had the local support, because it was organic from within the Somali. But now you've got the TFG, which is not a Somali solution. It's just full of warlords coming together. And even they couldn't sit together, as the lady said. They are throwing each other on chairs. I mean, the solution should come from the Somalia. I don't think the AU or the United Nations could do anything. It has to come from Somalia themselves.
It's a hand right at the back there. We're still trying to get Bob Bauer on the phone, I think. He's probably listening.
The solution did come from Somalia, and I quite supported the ICU because I'm Muslim, I'm Somalian, and I grew up in the West. For the first time I have seen, well, I envisaged a hope was when I saw a documentary by Adrian Hartley, Channel 4 producer, and he covered the whole issue about the Islamic courts in Somalia. The only reason I was happy with the UIC was because they were bringing our people together by religion. Somalis have in common just the religion. We don't have nothing else in common. We've got clan warfare. We've got a lot of poverty issues that needed to be sorted out. But I was quite happy because the courts did bring people together in a way that no other government could, including the federal government.
If I could just pick up on that, I was in Somalia in 95 when another union of Islamic courts took over North and South Mogadishu, and it all worked absolutely swimmingly until you asked, what happens if that gunman shoots somebody? And he goes, oh, well, he's on our side, we can't touch him. Is it not the case that there is, with the best will in the world, a heavy clan dimension to even the Union of Islamic Courts, their ayr principally?
Well, you could argue yes and no, and because I'm Somali myself, You could argue yes, because when you see a chaotic situation, when you see no functioning government, lawless and all that, and people tend to follow to the clans approach because they can get protection, whereas they cannot get from others. So, but however, Islamic Courts Union proved that clanism is not the solution for Somalis, and most of the clans were happy with them, and even though there's some people were against them because of the harsh implementation in terms of stopping cut and what have you. But however, I think they've done a fantastic job in terms of the 6 months, and most of Somalis now, what they look at, 6 months, peace and stability, 16 years, chaotic situation, the international community never came to help, but now when they got the peace, Americans came bombarded. So that, how could you foresee for people inside Somalia who had that 6 months stability and now it's gone away?
Well, if I could just interject there, the international community did rather give up on Somalia because they put an awful lot of time and effort and got killed for their purposes. I mean, there have been at least a dozen aid workers murdered over the last decade. I mean, the very few numbers of foreigners who've tried to go in since '95 have been topped.
Absolutely. The only reason is because of the chaotic situation. The only reason, when you got a chaotic situation, imagine in London, there's no police, no protection, people will fight each other.
So why don't the community get together and think, okay, here's a doctor who's coming to do pediatric health care, we'll look after him or her and make sure that the nutters don't chop his head off. I mean, at some stage the Somalis actually have to take responsibility for Somalia, and one way they can do that, surely, is by not killing people who come and try and help him.
Of course, I think the Somalis done a lot in terms of, if you look like Somaliland or north of the country, you see peace stability there. If you look like Puntland, there's peace stability, some and order. But when you come to the south, because of the Mogadishu has been the capital, and seeking the attention of who's going to be the government. So in terms of politically, that's what we're lacking in terms of Somalis. But when you look about the institutions going, and if you go now to Mogadishu, you'll see hospitals, private hospitals, you'll see education, you'll see all that is happening despite of the lack of security. So people are trying their best, but you can only do so much because of the political, when it comes to political situation, there's external factor.
Gentleman in the scarf.
With all the grim news, with all the grim news that
name, rank, and number.
Oh, sorry, it's Joe Boyd. Sorry, no organization attached. With all the grim news that comes out of the area, you made reference to Somaliland, to Berbera, and we hear little hints, little news reports occasionally that this is a kind of idealistic, wonderful place where peace has broken out, where there's a civil society, where there's prosperous economic developments, but the international community refuses to recognize it. And I just wondered if it is really so idealistic, as so positive as we are led to believe, if any of you have been there or know anybody who has been there, and what are the obstacles to allowing Somaliland to be recognized as a separate country the way they want?
Ooh.
Let's hear it. Have you been there?
No.
No, all right. Let's hear from somebody who's been there. You've been there.
My name is Abdulaziz Shuri. I've actually been to Somalia in the summer 2006, and I was one of the people who have actually enjoyed driving through Mogadishu. And I've also been to Hargeisa. And at that moment, I think Hargeisa and Mogadishu was both peaceful in that sense. So yes, there is a stability, and there has been a stability in the north, but I think we have to actually look at the problem to get the solution here. And what I think the problem has been, number one, the Ethiopian regime, not necessarily the Ethiopian people, who is a dictatorial rule, and also the Bush administration. The reason I say this is, all the weapons and all the problems that has been happening in Somalia, and the warlords was given arms by Ethiopia for all those years. And also America has actually destroyed the only hope that has appeared in Somalia recently, which is actually getting rid of Islamic courts, who have actually brought big peace back and stability in Somalia. Can I just add your list of this so-called government? a fisheries minister, have actually given an interview the other day when he was asked about international Somali pirates on the sea. And this is quote what he said. These boys are actually looking after our seas. That's what he said. And the Islamic courts were the only group who actually arrested pirates around Somalia. So I think the problem here is Ethiopian regime and America. Thank you.
Gentleman in the stripy top.
My name is Bahailu. I'm from Ethiopia originally. We all heard from the panelists, I think most of us are trying to see Ethiopia as a regional bully, but I think that's not a fair assessment. Most of us, whether it's those living in Ethiopia or in diaspora, I don't think we agree what the government is doing. But we have to accept, all of us here, the regional problem there is more complicated. It is not throwing a couple of words here. It's not going to solve that. We have to face up to the problem. The problem is shared, or the problem is created by all three nations. If you take Somalia, if you take Eritrea, if you take Ethiopia. So saying that Somalia have been okay for 6 months is no. I mean, Somalia is doing their bit to destabilize Ethiopia. Eritrea is doing their best to destabilize Ethiopia. Of course, Ethiopia is big, 70 million, so they can't send 8 million with the blessing of the Americans. But again, at the end of the day, the American support might shift tomorrow to Eritrea. We'll be back to square one. So all of us has to face, especially those of us from that region, the problem is more complicated. We should try to think, sitting on the table, trying to resolve our own problem. We can rely on America today with Ethiopia, but I don't know, tomorrow they might support Somalia, Ethiopia or Kenya. So let us, all of us, face the problem, whether we're Somalis. It's no good blaming Ethiopia or blaming Meles Zenawi or blaming Isaias or blaming the Hassan Sharif or whoever is ruling. We have to face up to the problem. It's more complicated, and we have to accept all of them have contributed to the misery of the population in that area. Thank you.
Lady, woman, sorry, sexist to say lady.
Hi there. My name is Nima, and I am from the imperial foothold, Djibouti. That's always been, I think, a foothold for the French and now for the Americans. I think I agree. As Somalis, we have to. My parents are originally from Somalia, although I've lived in the West for a long time. I think I agree. Somalis have to take responsibility, and we really have to look into our problems, and only us can solve our problems. Granted, it has to happen without any, external influence. But I think as Somalis are very hypocritical about the problem that exists in Somalia or the Horn of Africa in general. There's always been tribal division, deep-rooted, whether it's in Djibouti, in Somalia, and I don't think we've ever, as Somalis or Djiboutian, faced up to that. I mean, it's quite easy to say the Americans are the problem here or the Ethiopians are. Yes, we agree on that. But I think the problem is deeper than that. It's a tribal division. I mean, we talk about Somaliland and we talk about a certain stability. Yes, there is a stability. I mean, very fragile. But it's based on tribal division. It's how can you explain a country, a nation divided in two, and one side is, doing rather well, but doesn't really care about the rest. And it's simply based on tribal division, something that we've never faced to, and I think we're not ready to face to. And I think as long as Somalis, we're not ready to recognize that problem, there will never be a solution. The solution is not, I don't think the problem is whether we have Al-Qaeda there or, there are initiatives there. Yeah, people try, but they're actually, I think, barking at the wrong tree. It's not, the problem isn't Al-Qaeda or religion in Somalia. I think it's tribal division, and we're not facing up to that.
And what would make you face that?
I think discussions, there's never been a debate about tribal division. I mean, I come from Djibouti, and my parents are originally from Somalia, so a tribe who is from Somalia, and we've always been discriminated against, and I don't think we've never, nobody really discusses that in Djibouti. I mean, as I've lived all my life in Djibouti, I left when I was 18, and I don't think I could go back, and I don't think I could ever find a job simply because I'm Somali and from a different tribe. But that's not something that, we debate about. That's not something we discuss. And I think that the problem is even deeper in Somalia. And I think that's where the problem is.
Hi, I'm Lucy Bailey. I work at World Service Radio. The question I wanted to ask was, what does the panel think it would take, or does the panel think it would be possible for the TFG to acquire, to gain legitimacy in the eyes of many more Somalis? And following on from what the last speaker said, I wondered whether the interesting idealistic approach of the Ethiopian government, that of ethnic federalism, might be one way to go, or are the structures of democracy, the sort of superimposed Western-style democratic structures, ever going to work in any form to bring together such a clan-based society?
I think that's one for you.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the TFG, yes, TFG now they are in the power in Somalia with the Ethiopian help. So in order for people to legitimately accept what it requires is first to learn lessons from Islamic Courts Union. Second, what they need to change their approach completely and understand that they are the leaders, and the leaders are accountable to its people. It needs for them to have, people who are really wanting to make a difference, really to change the society, and that can only come within the people. So they need to go back to the people and study the people and say, well, hang on, you are better than me, why not take the lead? So until that happens, until they see the authoritarian, it's going to be a problem. Second, the other problem is how they're going to deal with Ethiopia. Ethiopia has got its own interest.
No, that wasn't the question.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, but
if I cut you off there.
Deal with it?
Yeah, no, we've dealt with that.
Can I make just a derisive comment about ethnic federalism? I interviewed Meles at the time, and I thought it was a great idea. I think everything they've done since has shown that it's a total con. If you talk to Ethiopians, most of them will say that the Tigrayans have their officials in every single area that is likely to secede, and that they're the people controlling everything, and it's all very, very ethnic. And frankly, if they really believed in ethnic federalism, why did they feel so threatened by the Islamic court's agenda of uniting the Somali-speaking peoples? I mean, they should have welcomed it. Allegedly they have no issue with these various areas going off and seceding, yet they felt so threatened that they were obliged to invade. I always find it interesting when countries, America being, and ourselves being great examples, when countries are so threatened that they just have to invade, and you wonder, it's a huge country of 70 million people that just had to invade because it was so vulnerable.
Yeah, well, they call it preemptive action. Anyway, I think you have the movement of the Ogaden Liberation Front, and you've got the Oromo Liberation Front, and obviously the Ethiopian government, was concerned by its territorial integrity. I think just to add to what Michela and Rahim had said, in the new constitution in Ethiopia, there is Article 39, which actually gives the right to the regions for self-determination and possibly secession. So that's part of the constitution. It's included in the constitution. And you have opposition people who are actually criticizing the government of Ethiopia, saying that Meles is just sort of contributing to the complete collapse of the country, and maybe in the future we won't have an Ethiopia anymore. And on the other hand, I think this Article 39 does exist in the Constitution, but in practice we haven't seen it being applied. So that's the only answer I can give you.
I see a lot of Somali women
in the audience. I'd quite like to hear from them. Sorry, I've looked straight over your head.
My name's Samal, and I've just got a... Yeah. I have a brief question. Is tribalism incompatible with Western-style democracy? In other words, is dictatorship the only answer for countries like Somalia?
Well, the Scottish get over it, sort of.
Well, no. Dictatorship has no place in terms of... what it needs of a leadership who could understand how to accommodate to people in terms of equal sharing for the power, in terms of equal opportunity. But when you look about, saying, the tribes, and you divide the tribes and say each tribe needs to get what they want, then you're creating division within the people. So it needs, I haven't got a bullet that can answer the question, but it needs for each tribe to have a system where they will recognize other tribes has got similar interests, has got even more similar as them, rather than each tribe thinking of, I can get the best position.
What do you think is the answer to your question?
Sorry, do you mind if I sit down? I think that's kind of sort of a fantasy in a way, because what you have to find in Somalia is for the ordinary person to have a trust in the leadership and the system. And if I'm going to vote tomorrow for the only reason because this person belongs to my tribe, then democracy won't work. That's what happens in Somaliland, where the power is shared through a tribal system. You've got this region, we will give 33% of the power, and that's how it works. And at the moment, if you've got tribal division within the Islamic court, which I seem to, a lot of people seem to be romanticizing, and it's quite a dangerous sort of I think issue there. I don't think it will work. What you will need to have is a system where people will trust, not through colonialism, but through because what the person or the leadership will bring to the country. And I doubt that will happen within my lifetime, unfortunately.
Hands up who'd be in favour in Somalia of hearing rather more from the women and a little less from the men. There's somebody.
Hello. To be true enough...
Sorry, who are you?
Hadia. To be honest, I don't think that the TFG will work simply because it wasn't established inside Somalia. If you look at Puntland or Somaliland, even though democracy is not very good, but people are willing to hold on to the peace. Why? Because all the institutions were based inside. People came to an agreement inside, done by the clan elders. And I think as long as Somalis go abroad or are forced to go abroad to reconcile their differences, it won't work.
Gentleman back.
My name is Abdul Rahman, and I'm not a politician, man, and I'm not good for the politician, man. And one thing I want to make clear for it, like for example, when we talk about Michela and Abdullah Yusuf, new government. Michela, he used to be my neighbor, and he used to be from Ethiopia. He used to be a terrorist from Ethiopia. Now he's coming one of the president in Ethiopia. Abdullah Yusuf also, he used to be terrorist from the Somalia. Now he's coming one of the president. Both of them, they call it, both the countries terrorist. America, they're looking, or they're after terrorists. Like, for example, when you talk about Ras Kamboni early on, Ras Kamboni, the place I was born, the place I was grow up, and the place now the American they was attacking, they after terrorists, and they're dying about a lot of Somalian people, they was dying there. And the other things, the other issues I want to talk about it today is, and the only reason I was coming here, I thought they was looking for the solution in Somalia. But the main thing is look like it, all of this situation is they're after terrorists, or they're after looking for the terrorists, specifically how to attack for division to Somalia. When you are terrorist, when you are subtle, Somalia, they used to be almost the last 15, 16 years, they never be subtle. Almost they was fighting each other, they was killing each other. Certain people, they're believing in Somalia their own problems. They are not our own problems. Because nowadays when you see in this world, You see them a lot of selfish people. When I give you 50 grand today, and you can do it anything you want it. The Somalian people, the people ruling, or they are all of them, they are warlords. They get some money from the Western or the Americans. But one thing is I want to make clear for you, especially the man, I didn't catch your names, because you was keep talking about on attacking Somalia, not attacking, saying Somalia they have got terrorists or Al-Qaeda positions. But one thing is I want to make clear, because when you have got the Al-Qaeda or terrorists or anything at all, when you have got your own problem inside the Somali or outside the problems in Somalia, now we live in England, Somalian people, we have got a lot of problems. Our kids, our families, our children, everywhere we have got problems. But we are not blaming from Ethiopia, we are not blaming from the Kenya, we are not blaming anything else. The only things we're blaming on myself, on my side, or my opinion is Western or the American most likely. That's my question.
We haven't talked about how the transitional federal government has came about. The transitional federal government was the result of a 3-year-long reconciliation process that took place in Kenya. And the result was the election of the government, which was being elected in a way of proportional representation, which is, in a way, commands some element of legitimacy. And the question is, we haven't been talking what the solutions are. The solution, in my opinion, is actually to support, and it's the responsibility of every Somali to actually rally behind the government in order to actually achieve the institutions that have been destroyed for the last 16 years. And this is extremely important.
Sorry, there was a... Sorry, could you identify yourselves? I forgot with the last speaker.
Well, my name is Mohammed Hussein. I'm of Somali origin. Somali, actually, background. Well, I think it's... I've been listening. Thanks all of you for your comments. But one point I see here is that you cannot solve a problem without knowing the problem itself. Somalia, we talk about tribalism, we talk about chaos, fighting. Why? We say Somalis, and when you write in newspapers and you hear on TVs, the Somalis are people of the same origin. We say the Somalis are clan-based. What is the clan? How do you divide it in Somalia? Is it the same as in other parts of Africa? I can tell you it's different. Somalis are like one father and a mother, a family, having many kids, and kids having kids, and so on. So everybody counts to the 1,000th or 100th great-grandfather. That way. And then animosity starts. Like, well, this guy is closer to me, kin-wise, than this guy. So there starts nepotism. There starts hatred, again, for no reason. One hates me simply because I belong to a certain clan, simply because my father is that and my grandfather is that, and so on. The problem was not from there. We have lived that way and respected one another for hundreds of years or centuries. The problem is started when the colonizers came to the Horn of Africa, like many other parts of the world. What started there was the issue called divide and rule. They divided us in clans, favored some, pushed others away. After Somalia becoming independent, the issue was continued from there, that the dictatorial, for example, government, when the military took over, and others before it, they based their choosing of positions on clans. The West supported that. Europe and America, for example. Russia, the Eastern Bloc, were also doing the same thing. For example, in the late 80s, when the Somalia was at the threshold of civil war, US was warned that Somalia was heading toward a civil war. Stop providing arms to Somalia, and instead give aid, other type of aid, for example, financial aid, and educational support, and so on. But they neglected that. Somalia, the problem of Somalia is a result of a political laboratory that has proven wrong, which was conducted by the West. And when that happened again, Somalia was neglected by the international community, front-run by the West. And what happened again was that they were still involved in manipulating the weak Somalis, dealing with the warlords who were harassing, killing, raping women and any citizen of Somalia. The last was when the transitional federal government was set up in Nairobi. The US government opted to work with the warlords rather than working and supporting the transitional federal government. Then again what happened was that the Somalis saw that the world was not in favor of it. We tried to get our own solution to our problem because everybody was saying it's Somali's own problem. Then we thought the final cut, which could be a solution to the Somali people, was uniting under Islam. When we did that, the West came back and destroyed it. Now, that was a good signal. Somalia is again in the focus of the world. If this problem is not dealt with immediately, if the West and anybody else does not support the transitional federal government, a threat is imminent from Somalia, which in fact will solve our problem as Islam. We will not kill, rape, or harass one another. We'll be united under Islam, but that will be a threat to the international security. It's very clear. So this is to be addressed. We have got two solutions here. One is our own way, which threatens the world, or it's a one which could come or could emanate from outside, supported by the Somalis, which will solve both our problem and the problem we should impose on the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman here in the white shirt.
Thank you very much. My name's Farhad. You just sound a bit like George Bush there. You're either with us or you're against us. I'm not really going to get into the nuts and bolts in the question that you've asked. I think one question was raised by an audience member about asking what should happen next and what's the real true answer. And I believe that's why many of us from Somali background, from all other different ethnic backgrounds actually here today, in really coming in and actually to show support with one another and saying that what's actually happened in Somalia was very, very wrong. If I could just give a very, very brief background. I actually came here when I was, kind of lost my point, about 4 years old here. And my first memory of seeing a lot of Somali people was June 1988 when we used to bombard Westminster and go around and saying that the civil war during that time with Siad Barre regime was going all over Somalia and actually killing their own people, was to actually demonstrate. And the demonstration was done from people from all different tribes, and there was demonstrations done. People actually travelled all the way from Liverpool to Cardiff and so on and so forth. So when I saw that, I immediately felt a reaction of, this is one nation that's would really like for the West. I mean, they lived in a Western world to actually just grasp out and actually say no to war. But unfortunately, we don't actually live in that type of civilization now, where we know that through Americans' way of doing business is actually handing over money to people who apparently are going to give them suspects, but there's actually more to it than that. I think from my perspective here, and the reason why I actually came here was, I believe as a new generation is actually up and coming, and I've actually met a lot of like-minded people like myself. I think we can play a very, very integral part of actually not just solving the problem in Somalia, but actually solving the problems within our own communities within this country here, and actually being able to actually see past this tribalism, ideology that's actually been conditioned, unfortunately, all over the world. You can go to the United States of America and Europe, and everyone's actually just within their own tribe, and they own parts of one land. So the question was raised by the audience member of saying that, how can we move forward? I believe the way we can move forward is to at least have some allegiance towards each other by actually seeing this new crop of new generation that actually were born in this country and are actually going to start realising that they feel more British than the Anglo-Saxon person who's actually living next door, and so be it. And we need to actually empower them for them to actually realise that whilst they're living in England, that they do actually have an ethnicity background which goes back centuries and centuries. I've just got one question to the audience member, to the panel here, and one question which wasn't raised was that the apparent war on Somalia was some natural minerals apparently that actually hasn't really been tapped into the market, and apparently Yemen and Somalia are one that's actually in the United States of America's radar at the moment in time. So could this be US way of actually diverting the catastrophic, invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan? And, the gentleman over there just see the saying, like George Bush said a couple of years ago, you either with us or against us. And how far would they then actually attempt to go and actually take people's civilians' life? Thank you.
I think on the mineral question, which is something I looked into in some depth in the mid-90s, the bad news, or the good news, frankly, for Somalia is that if you're talking about oil, there's a little bit of oil, but it's not financially viable to exploit. What other minerals there? People have had a good look around, but there's not a great deal. And if you fly over Somalia, you can actually see the oil exploration lines that were there. Conoco was very heavily involved in that, and it doesn't compare to the resources in Sudan and places. So, frankly, that's probably good news for Somalia, in my view. I think we can take one more question, then we can go. I need to wee.
My name's Soraya. I have to admit I don't know a lot about Somali politics or Somali. I've got a friend who's Somalian, so she fills me in what she can. But I have to say the situation at the moment, and just what I've been hearing today about rivalry between clans as well, it sounds like it's such a mess that any kind of political discussion is probably not going to achieve very much at all. It's almost you're playing a game of immature politics. Now, my family are from Pakistan, and there you can see there's a democracy. We think of it more as an autocracy, really. We've got a dictator in power, but it's all got the nice trappings of being democratic in some way or another. And there, although superficially it looks like, yes, it's a peaceful country, economically it's doing okay, I think for the man on the street, essentially it's quite a dire situation. I think probably the same for Somalia. The politics that goes on and the reality in the street is probably completely different. And I think in situations like those, I think what you're crying out for is some kind of charismatic leader or some kind of intellectual revolution to get people out of the quagmire that they're in. So my question to the panel would be, is that a possibility? And particularly when you've got a diaspora of Somalis all over the world.
Yeah, the answer is yes. Somalis in the diaspora is already starting to question that, and it's time for them to take part in the politics and also see whether they could take part in the politics in Somalia. So that might be a way forward. But it definitely needs, as you said, a new revolutionary for Somalis.
Great. On that note, perhaps we can continue in the elsewhere, but I've got to wrap the conversation up because I need to go. So, thank you very much to all the members of the panel.